In other news, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is today in China. He has met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. With this, he's become the first G7 leader to visit China since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. The high-stakes visit is being watched closely by Western capitals. Many wonder how serious Germany really is about reducing its economic reliance on Asia's rising superpower and confronting its communist leadership. This trip comes amidst rising voices within Scholz's ruling coalition who've been calling for a rethink of Germany's China policy. Beijing has been Berlin's biggest trading partner for the last 6 years, but in a bid to address the rising geopolitical tensions, the current three-party coalition government has announced its intent to reduce its economic dependence on China and strengthen ties with democratic states in Asia. According to a recent survey, 1 in 2 Germans hope that Germany's economy can be more independent of China. The West is also cautiously watching Scholz's one-day visit to Beijing, especially after one of Europe's largest ports, the Hamburg port, joined forces with the Chinese shipping giant. The West is concerned about China's human rights record and trade practices. Scholz is expected to raise these human rights concerns and discuss the autocratic tendencies of the Chinese regime. According to a German official, Scholz also hopes that China could help persuade Russia to end the war in Ukraine.
Zur Demokratie dazu, dass man Petitionen an das Parlament richtet.
For more on that story, we're now joined by Pierre Cabestan from Hong Kong. He is an emeritus professor at the French National Centre for Scientific Research. Thanks very much, Mr. Cabestan, for speaking to WION. Now, how does Beijing perceive this crucial visit by the German Chancellor?
I think it's a very important visit for China, because at the first visit of a European Prime Minister since the 20th Party Congress, and China needs to improve its relations with the European Union, with the European nations. The tensions between China and the United States keep growing, and China would like to use that occasion to try to drive a wedge, actually, between European countries and the US. And Germany is a perfect candidate for that strategy, in the sense that the German economy is highly dependent upon China. And as you know, Prime Minister Scholz had taken with him a large delegation of business people to China, with the expectation to improve actually trade and economic relations between Germany and China, at a moment where Germany and the rest of Europe is hit by inflation and slowdown, and maybe very soon an economic recession.
Now, how do you look at the concerns within the German government and the European Union over Olaf Scholz's visit to China, especially at a time when Scholz is calling for a revamp of Germany's ties with Beijing?
Yes, Germany is in a very special position, because on the one hand, it is the heavyweight of the European Union. On the other hand, it's much more dependent upon the Chinese economy than the rest of the European Union. And there is a kind of gap, actually, between the European Union's China policy, which has become more and more critical now for the European Union. China is clearly a systemic rival, and with Germany, and Germany has a different position, which is to continue cooperation in spite of important differences on human rights, but also on security issues. So Scholz, Prime Minister Scholz, Chancellor Scholz, is hoping to sort of protect Germany's economic interests in China. But at the same time, I think there is an expectation on the German side to influence China, which means maybe a bit idealistic, but to make sure that China will remain on a reform path, at the time, Xi Jinping has accumulated so much power that he seems ready to do other things that economic reforms, let alone political reforms.
Considering the size of the Chinese economy, do you believe Beijing could have exerted more pressure on Moscow to end the war in Ukraine? Because that's clearly something the West has been asking China to do for a long time.
I don't think it's in China's interest to exert any pressure on Moscow. Actually, China is happy with the posture of Russia vis-à-vis the West and NATO, because we have to bear in mind that China's major rival is the United States and its alliance systems, both in Europe and in Asia. So if there is something that China would like to weaken or dismantle, hopefully, is the alliances concluded between the United States and the European allies after World War II and its Asian allies, particularly Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, and not to mention Australia. So that's China's strategy. In that respect, China needs to cultivate good relations with Russia, and there is no, we shouldn't expect that China is going to put pressure on Russia to end this war in Ukraine.
Mr. Cabeston, thanks very much for speaking to WION.